Good morning, everyone. It's Gary Sly and the Legacy of Handmade Objects. It's Monday morning, July the 7th. We've celebrated Independence Day over the weekend and listened to fireworks and eaten hot dogs and all the kind of fun things that go along with that. I've got a little bit of a book review I want to share with you today, and I'm heading off a little bit later today for a really cool interview that I'm going to be airing over the next few weeks with a 98-year-old needlepoint expert. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. Just to say a word about those interviews when the subjects are not sitting here next to me. When we talk about legacy, it is, I think, so important to hear the stories and know the stories of these stitchers and crafters and hand workers who've gone before us. I've mentioned before, one of the things I loved when I was taking a week-long course in Navajo weaving was that at the end of the course in the Navajo or the Diné tradition, they do a prayer of thanks to those grandmothers who came before us, who gave us the skills and the ability to do the Navajo weaving. And we cover our face as part of that experience to understand that many of those grandmothers and forebears who came before us are today unknown and unnamed, but their skill and their ability continues to carry us forward. So when you see me doing those interviews, I love it. I love interacting with people, and I think it's a lot of fun, but it really does fit in my mind, very well with this whole idea of the legacy of handmade objects. Every so often I come across a book or a description of a book even that I go, wow, I wish I could have written that book. I've had this intuition and kind of a growing sense of certainty over the last 50 plus years since I've been stitching that there really are a great deal of therapeutic attributes that go along with working with your hands. Luckily, Dr. Anne Kurteterp, who is a Danish psychologist and also an avid cross-stitcher, or not cross-stitcher, but crafter, has written a book, and luckily also for us it's been translated into English recently by some intrepid folks, and it's for sale through DMC, the fiber company that we know of out of France. It's a book called Craft Psychology, How Crafting Promotes Health. Now, you know, there's a lot of anecdotal information and stories about how working with our hands calms us down and brings us peace and so many things like that. But this psychologist has actually surveyed the literature. She's looked at almost 500 scientific and scholarly kind of articles about the effects of working with our hands. And she's created some models of how that works based on her knowledge of psychology and the workings of our emotions. There's no doubt in my mind that in some of the toughest times of my life, I've retreated into things like counted cross stitch, particularly very complex pieces, because that's what I needed at that time to center myself, to get myself down into the middle of who I was and kind of forget a little bit about some of the stresses and concerns of the day. I will probably bring this book back up a couple of times over the next few months. But I thought what I would do today is just give a little brief overview of what she says are the positive effects of working with your hands. Now, she has a nice long list in here of all the possible things we could be talking about when we talk about handmade objects or crafting, as she calls it. It does include things like cooking, woodwork, pottery. I don't know if I can find the list very easily, but I've referred to this in the past that there are just so many different ways that we can use our hands. Willow weaving, wood turning, folding origami. It's a very long list, as you can see. And as I suspected, something like cooking or gardening are there, along with what we love: cross-stitch, embroidery, needlepoint, knitting, crochet, weaving, all those sort of things. So she identifies 5 very positive effects from what we do, and I think if you're an avid stitcher, if you've been doing this for very long, you would identify with some of them. And if you can't identify with these, it may be that you haven't found the right handmade craft to work on yet, because for my mind, these really are effects that come when I sit down and do the things that I love the most. The first is one she calls flow, a state of meaningful self-forgetfulness. So um, no matter how stressful the day has been, I pretty much always sit down and do a little stitching at the end of the day. I get up a little early in the morning for the same reason, because sometimes I have those nagging worries in the middle of the night that make me toss and turn. And for me, the idea of flow, it really is a sense that sometimes I am into the work so much that I'm able, even if very briefly, I'm able to forget about some of the troubles and the trials and the stresses that come my way. I think I've mentioned to you that I've got this big retreat coming up here, sponsored by the shop, the first Saturday in August. I'm starting to stress a little bit. I'm starting to worry that everything will be exactly as we want it to be. But the idea of flow is that you retreat into yourself. You're centered and working on something with your hands that helps you to move away from that idea. One customer I had some time back gave me a perfect illustration of this. She said that when she stitches, she feels like that little girl who goes out and who used to go out in her backyard and find a place back in the corner where nobody could see her and just kind of pretend that she was in a different world. For me, cross stitch in particular, but also some of these other crafts as well, give me that kind of feeling. There is a calmness and a presence to working with our hands. Um, we're generally speaking, I think, away from buzzing screens and things like that. We may have the television or the radio or something like that on in the background, but the rhythmic structure of handwork, moving in and out, up and down, really does bring a calmness and a presence to that moment. You can't do a craft unless you're paying attention to that craft. And so you have to, both physically and mentally, separate yourself from what's happening around you. Now, I've had family members at times be kind of upset with me and say, well, you're stitching, you don't pay any attention to me. There are times, of course, when I do lose track of what they may be talking about or what's happening around me, but for the most part, it helps to enhance that. It calms me. It gives me a structure from which to work off of, and then I'm more attentive and I hope more caring and more able to listen to those around me. Positive emotions for me flow from handwork, and this is the third effect that this book mentions. Every day when I come to a project that I've been working on over a long period of time, I'm able to see my progress. Sometime soon I'll show you where I am with that big old crewel piece I'm working on upstairs here at the house. I've come a long way on that piece in the last few months, and it's almost 3 feet wide. So there's a lot going on, and it's becoming quite large and quite bulky. But I delight in that. There's a sense that I'm accomplishing something step by step by step, stitch by stitch. I don't have to look all the way out to the end. I don't have any deadlines to deal with, but it really does give me a good sense. Now, the writer of this book talks a lot of the actual physical, psychological effects. She talks about dopamine and those kind of things we've heard of that flow into our systems when we're positively influenced by something. Studies have shown that working and retreating into a passion like cross stitch or any kind of handcraft really does create those positive feelings, and those chemical changes actually do happen. If you're interested in a little more about that, her book is a good place for you to go and explore that. A real important effect, and it's the fourth one that she mentions in the book for me, is that of achievement. I have always, since I was a little boy, hated the sense that I was wasting time. I can remember as a little boy sitting and listening to this old grandmother clock that my father had, tick, 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 and thinking about the fact that there were only so many ticks in my life. There are only so many moments that we have. And I've always had this feeling that I wanted to capture as much of this wonderful life that we have as possible. And I never feel like I have wasted time when I am stitching. Now, there are those times when I make a mistake and I have to back up and I have to frog everything out. Um, and I guess you could say overall that's a waste of time. But even that, I can kind of fit into the overall work and understand that there are going to be times when I make mistakes. And so having to back up and take something out is not necessarily uh, a bad thing. I've also come to accept that there's certain projects that I just don't like doing, and so I lay them down. And I guess you could argue that the time that I spent in them up to that point would be wasted. But for me, I don't see it that way. It gives me a better sense of what I like to do. I'm pretty honed in on now on the type of projects that I like to do. And I may find myself, if I'm doing a commission piece or something else, veering away from that. But I always know where I want to get back to, which is my big, complicated, full coverage cross-stitch pieces. And I can't wait to get a new one started. So there's always a sense of achievement. You can watch the things happen. I don't have it to show you here this morning, but I always keep an Ort jar with all the strands and the extra pieces that come from when I'm stitching. And I just emptied it on the 4th of July after 2 years. And you could actually see the layers in my Ort jar of the various colors which represented the various projects that I've accomplished during that time. We all need to feel like we're valuable, that we are achieving something, that we leave something here in this world for others to appreciate it and enjoy. And so the sense of achievement for me is one of the strongest of the 5 effects that she talks about. Finally, the 5th effect that she mentions, and this is where you see her psychological background and her scientific training, is where she actually describes the cognitive changes, improvements, or stability that comes from working with our hands. There's a good bit of research that suggests that as we get older and as we begin to feel like we're losing some of our cognitive elasticity, that is, we can't remember things as well as we used to, and we have problems kind of keeping up with what's happening around us. Building and rebuilding and keeping strong those pathways in our brain are one of the positive effects of working with our hands. It is possible, and this is surprising, it is possible as we get older to even build new pathways in our brains. You can teach an old dog new tricks. You can learn new things and find ways to integrate that and have that become a part of your bank of information that's included up in your brain. There's a lot of research going on about this right now because of the prevalence of dementia and Alzheimer's and some of those debilitating issues that many people have experienced. There's a sense that with some forethought and in choosing the proper kind of things to be working on that give us joy and give us flow and achievement and all these things we're talking about, that we can strengthen and even rebuild connections in our thought processes. Not sure if I've spent much time talking about it, but I did have a wonderful experience a few years back where I worked with a woman in weaving who had had a traumatic brain injury. Her therapist suggested that she find something to do with her hands because she'd been a very avid crafter before the injury. And she came to me wanting to see if she could learn how to weave. And she actually excelled in some aspects of it. She particularly loved winding a warp, because of the repetitive and kind of soothing nature of that part of the process. She did find sometimes that when she got to the actual weaving, she got a little frustrated because sometimes it wasn't as perfect as she was expecting it to be. And having been a crafter before that, that was kind of frustrating for her. But I have no doubt that that process of learning the different aspects of weaving really did help to kind of rebuild some of the connections that had been lost in her mental abilities. I saw that over the months as we worked together on things. So, you know, it's funny, I hear a lot of guilty stories here in the shop of people who feel like they're spending their time working on this thing and it gives them so much pleasure, and maybe they shouldn't be spending so much time, or maybe they shouldn't be spending their money on it. Um, I've always had a sense, and this book, Craft Psychology, has really helped to reinforce that for me, that there's a reason why we get all those positive emotions from doing this. There really is a sense that this helps to make our lives better. And what better way to invest our time and our money and our energy than to make more use of these precious moments that we have in this life. I'm just getting into a section that I'm not going to talk about today, but she's talking about effects um, as you start talking about things like depression and obsessive compulsive disorders and other obviously more debilitating issues that people have. Depression is chronic in our culture, and there's good evidence that finding something to do with your hands that is satisfying, that takes you away from the present stress of the day, can fight depression. And what better, more valuable reason to go and buy some stuff and do some things, and really not even have to spend much money. Just get some leftover yarn and do some knitting and see how that works. What better way to begin to combat some of those issues? There's probably a reason why there's a turn back towards more handmade objects, the more mechanized and AI influenced our culture becomes. I love all that technology. I'm using it right here as I talk on this phone recording that I'm doing for you all. But at the same time, I crave the challenge and the sense of accomplishment that I have when I sit down and do something with my hands. So I'll be coming back to craft psychology a couple more times, I suspect, over the course of the next few months. I do recommend it, particularly if you want to look a little more closely at a research-based discussion of what happens behind the scenes as we do these wonderful handcrafts that we enjoy. I'm going to end for now. This is Gary Sly. Hope you have a great week. It's the legacy of handmade objects.